Give it up for Mr. Bryan Kett. Mwah.
Hi. It's so good just to see all of you and to see people, and I got really emotional when I walked in. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
It's not too far, it's not too low. This thing is kind of, all right, I'm just gonna talk about some shit. After college, my best friend Dave, he moved to Ethiopia. And he moved to Ethiopia to start a very prosperous chicken farm. He took on a defunct government chicken farm because that's the thing that people do. That's what Dave decided to do. And for years and years, he always asked me to come and visit him, but I was always so hesitant to do so because I wasn't really sure what the agenda was going to be when I went to Ethiopia to visit Dave. And Dave and I are very, very different people. Dave is fearless. Dave once climbed a volcano in an East African war zone, and he got heat stroke while doing this. And when I heard about this, I asked him about it afterwards. I said, are you okay? What was it like? And he said, it was, quote, an interesting experience. And I couldn't fathom that because on the contrary, I'm a very anxious person. I'm a very neurotic person. I'm not a risk taker. this is true, I get so worried that leftovers are gonna go bad that I make myself eat them as fast as possible. This morning for breakfast, I had salmon and broccoli because that's what I had last night. But in 2016, when Dave asked me to come visit him for the umpteenth time, I kept thinking about this quote, and it's a favorite quote of mine by Anais Nin, in which she writes, "Life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage." And I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the thing. Maybe this is like a courageous act that I can take. And so I said yes. I took the 19-hour flight. I flew the 9,000 miles. I met Dave in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, just jet-lagged out of my mind. He said, "Oh my gosh, so good to see you. As your welcome present, we're gonna go see something neat." Wouldn't tell me what it was. So we got in this car, this Russian car from the 80s that was just held together by rust and like willpower. And we took off rattling into the desert, losing engine parts as we went. And eventually we arrived at the base of this mountain. And I know Dave in mountains with his volcano experience. I was very, very cautious. But we got out, we met our guide. This young Ethiopian man who's going to take us the rest of the way to something neat. I had no idea what was happening, but we began hiking. We began hiking up this mountain for a couple hours. And eventually, we got to the base of this 40-foot vertical sandstone cliff, sheer rock wall. And our guide took off his shoes. And he asked that we do the same out of respect. And I was so worried and nervous. I turned to Dave. I said, "Now what?" And Dave replied by taking off his shoes as well. And I watched as he and our guide began to scale this vertical rock face and these old footholds and handholds straight up, no safety equipment. And I thought, no. There's no way that whatever we're going to go see is neat enough to necessitate this sort of risk. What's neat is solid ground. And so I turned just to find a place where I could wait this one out. And when I turned around, I have no idea where they came from, were these two just ancient Ethiopian mountain men. And they were wearing these tattered suit coats and trousers, and they gave me these big smiles that showed all their teeth. It looked like they had way too many teeth, kind of like sharks. And they just both kept nodding and beckoning to the wall, and I didn't want to upset them. And so the next thing I knew, my New Balance cross trainers were off. And I was standing before this wall, and I had no idea how to climb it, but then they began instructing me. Okay, in broken English, they began telling me where to put my feet and hands. It was right foot here, left hand there. And like this vertical game of Twister, I listened to them and I started actually doing it. And I was about halfway up this wall when I turned and I looked out behind me. And we were already at such a high elevation. From this vantage point, higher up on the wall, I could see all the way to the horizon, okay? These plains and these farms just stretched on to infinity. The wind howled past me. And when I turned to continue to climb, there, cut out in the rock, in an alcove, right at eye level, was a pile of human skulls, just casually stacked up, like a Thanksgiving centerpiece. And Dave yells down, well, fun fact, those are the bones of villagers from like 1,000 years ago. And I thought, that's not fun. Like, because suddenly the gravity of my situation really hit me. Like, we were way off the map, okay? There was no safety equipment, there was no hospital nearby. If I fell, I could be seriously hurt, or that could be it. Maybe these bones were from villagers who fell, like 1,000 years ago, when their best friend was taking them to see something neat. And suddenly, I just became overwhelmed with fear and trepidation, and I couldn't move. I was stuck there on that rock face. My muscles were just locked in place, and they became this achy, and they started burning, and minute after minute ticked by until I felt something on my ankle. And I looked down to find that one of these mountain men, having sensed my hesitation, climbed up after me in his suit coat, and he grabbed my ankle with his leathery hand, and he moved my foot to a spot higher up on the wall. And then the other mountain man climbed up beside me. He grabbed my wrist, and he moved my hand to a spot higher up on the wall. And these two gentlemen worked in tandem to position me up the wall like this gigantic, anxious marionette puppet until I eventually reached the top. I did it. I pulled myself over the edge, and I looked around, and I saw nothing. Just Dave grinning like an idiot, and I was ready to kill him. And again I said, now what? And Dave pointed. He pointed to this little metal door in the stone that I never would have seen. This was the something neat, right? And I composed myself, I collected myself, we've come this far. We opened the door and we went inside, and we found ourselves in this cavern. A cavern that Dave explained was a church. It was a church that had been hand-carved in the 6th century, in secret, so those worshiping could escape religious persecution. It was one of the most remote places on earth, and it was still in use. On the walls and ceiling were these fresco depictions of holy people and places. And around the perimeter, all these men in white robes sat quietly meditating. And I learned some of them had not been off the mountain in 50 years. And it was silent, and it was otherworldly. And all that animosity and angst and anger I'd been feeling, especially towards Dave, it dissipated. And instead I just became so overwhelmed and humbled just to be in that place. And not in any sort of religious sense, but just in the sense of being able to bear witness to this cradle of like our collective humanity. And I sat there, and all I could think about was that Anais Nin quote. Life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage. And it's true. Some risks are worth it. Some courageous acts are worth it. I wouldn't have ever experienced this had it not been for that. And Dave, sitting next to me, just looked over at me and he said, pretty neat, huh? And I was just so moved that all I could do was just nod. And then, thinking about whatever else Ethiopia might have to offer, I again asked, now what? Thanks.
Yeah.
How many of you were like super duper productive in the last 9 months? How many of you were amazing? Okay. I was not amazing. I watched, I slept, I bought an elliptical machine and put it in the middle of my living room because I was bound and determined not to, not to get this big. But when you write, at least for me, I need something to write about, right? So lately I got inspired. You want to hear a story?
Yeah.
Good, because I really want to take all this shit off. Ah, thank you, Jesus. Have you ever been pregnant?
Yes.
I'm at this party, afternoon brunchy, Los Feliz adjacent-y, white winey, and by that I mean white people whining. And I'm talking to this super fun woman, right? We're like really getting great conversation going. And I'm probably, cock blocking some guy named LK who's about to ink a deal with, CAA or UTA. But in truth, I'm sparing this woman a potential UTI. And I'm regaling her with the story. Amy, did you take me to this party? Do you know the one?
I don't know.
It was right off of Franklin. It was like an afternoon party. Who has parties in the afternoon? Anyway, I'm regaling her with the story of watching my goddaughter being born just 2 days prior. And in the dialogue, I innocently ask, well, have you ever been pregnant? And she burns me with that, you asshole, eyes. And she scolds, you can't ask me that. And I'm like, wait, what? Oh, I forget. It's the original don't ask, don't tell. Well, tonight I'm here to tell you I believe in the women's right to choose. Women are smarter than men by a long shot. In fact, I'm going to go on the record that women are better than men at everything. I'm talking everything, you name it, they're better, except for one teeny tiny little thing. Which I can't tell you because even though it's one tiny little thing in like the cosmic scope of everything, when I bring it up, every woman in the room gives me those you asshole eyes. I lost a friend over the right to choose debate. She was blasting the goddess that is Michelle Obama on Facebook for supporting third-term abortions, even though we all know there is usually a very good reason for having this procedure at such a late stage. And I want to flash this glaring spotlight on her. Oh, well, how far along were you when you had your abortion? Karen. But I don't, because I'm not allowed to ask. This will surprise you. She's a Republican. I know all about her secrets because she's got a big mouth. So I know about the affair, her rocky marriage. I know she still uses the N-word when she thinks she can get away with it. But I don't say a word. Now, someone very important to me, someone who I love very, very much, she had an abortion a long time ago. It was like the times when you used to have to drive to another state. She was young, way too young, but smart enough because she's a woman to know that this man who she was with had no business being a father. She couldn't tell anyone, not even her mom. And I wonder what's going on in her head, the fear, the confusion, shame, all alone in that clinic. I won't keep you in suspense. She had the abortion and later met the love of her life and had 2 amazing children. So the other night, I was rewatching What the Constitution Means to Me on Amazon Prime. Who's seen it? All right, go home and watch it. It should be required viewing for everyone. It is one woman's story, but really it's everyone's story. The way a good story is, right? And as I'm listening to the storyteller share her memory of her abortion, it triggers a memory. Me, all alone, in an office at Planned Parenthood. Now I know what you're thinking, but Larry, how could you have been pregnant? And to that I say, you're not allowed to ask. In the early 90s, I had been long distance dating this great guy named Mike for a good year or so, but the distance and the demands of a relationship coupled with my new passion to become a playwright had put a strain on us, and I broke things off. 6 months later, a week before the first big public reading of my very first play, Mike phones me in the middle of me going on and on about myself. He blurts out, Larry, I tested HIV positive. The air left the room. Panic, fear, guilt, heartbreak, compassion, dread. Pedro Zamora from MTV's The Real World had died only a few weeks earlier. I told no one. I drive 45 miles to the next town, Ann Arbor, Michigan, for an HIV test and anonymity. I was kind of a big deal in Toledo then, so I didn't want to do it locally, you know. It's not hard to be a big deal in Toledo, by the way. So Planned Parenthood, if you know and you should, is an amazing place. Their contribution to women's health is immeasurable. I see nodding heads. The counselor asked me, why are you getting tested? I begin my story, and it isn't long before I lose my shit. She takes my hand. We talk. We talk about me for a while, and me and Mike. And of course, as you know me, I need to hear her story. Her life has been threatened hundreds of times. She has to live far out in the country and drive into the city for her own safety. She makes nothing. I won't get my results for 2 weeks, so she writes her home number on a piece of paper. I could lose my job for this, but if you need to talk, you call me. 13 days later, the night before I am to get the news, I am out of my mind, and I finally pull out that piece of paper and I dial the number. Hi, this is Larry. I was in the clinic and you gave me your number, and Larry, you're negative. What? I've had your results for a week. Why didn't you call sooner? You'll be happy to know Mike turned out fine too. He was the president of AIDS Volunteers of Northern Kentucky for about 7 years. That night, I write a big check to Planned Parenthood. In my work, I'm a writer. I do a lot of consulting for nonprofit organizations, so whenever I'm asked to work on a project for Planned Parenthood or a YMCA shelter for battered women, or any organization that helps women, I agree with the proviso that it's pro bono. I have met women whose stories would stop your heart. I can't even tell you the one. It's so horrible. And they are strong, stronger than I could ever be. Now, I hope this story wasn't mansplaining. I was really trying hard to avoid that, but I do have some man questioning. Why don't some women want to see a woman in the White House? Why don't they want their daughters and granddaughters to know that it's possible? I was so excited when I was 9 years old when Shirley Chisholm ran for president in 1972. I asked my dad if he was going to vote for her, and he said no. Did everyone watch Mrs. America on Hulu? Brilliant, required reading. So tonight you go home, What the Constitution Means to Me on Amazon Prime. Mrs. America on Hulu. I was raised by strong women who loved me and loved me hard. I'm betting you were too. So this goes out to all the young women in my life, my goddaughter, my second cousins, my great nieces, my former students. If you're in a situation and you don't know what to do, I am here. I'm here to listen. I'm here to hold your hand. And I promise whatever you do, I will always support you. No questions asked. I know you will make the choice that is right for you because women can do everything better than men, except one tiny little thing, which I'm never going to tell you. Thank you. Now, if you like these sexy masks, I have 100 of them. So we're selling them at cost, $5 each at the front door. From me to you, thank you. Thank you for everybody for making tonight happen.